When I think of the word hood, I think of a person, a place, and perhaps even a thing. I'm Sir Crepsta, and welcome to Ghost Stories from the Hood. Tonight's tale of terror is entitled Child's Play, Bo's Ghost. I'm aware that in the past, I've shared a story involving a person named Bo. That particular Bo was a nickname given to my beloved uncle, whose real name was Mr. Bobby Guy. R.I.P. Uncle Bo. Tonight's story involves a friend of mine whom also shared the same nickname as my uncle. Only this friend was of a lighter complexion, meaning that he was of Caucasian race. The race part is irrelevant. I just had to point it out so that it was clear that this story is about a completely different Bo. So, sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and be terrified by yet another ghost story from the hood. The time frame of this story was around 1995. It was then that I had recently moved back home from Nashville, Tennessee. About a month after being back home, I was told by my uncle about a job working for a cleanup company out of Bowling Green, Kentucky called J&L Chemical. The job was at an enormous aluminum plant located in Russellville, Kentucky. It went by the name of Logan Aluminum because it was located in Logan County. After having worked at that job for about a week, I was told about a job opening within the plant from my uncle, who also worked with J&L Chemical at the time. The job was in an independent department of Logan Aluminum called Melt and Cast. I immediately told my uncle to let the boss that oversaw the J&L Chemical part know that I would gladly accept the job if it was still available. The hours for this job were from 5 a.m. until 2 p.m., which worked out perfect for me. It allowed me to have the rest of the entire day to do whatever I wanted to do. I instantly knew that this was going to be the ideal job for me, working in this enormous plant. I accepted the job on Friday, but it wasn't until following Monday that I was able to actually start my new job. Excited as all outdoors, I couldn't wait until Monday came. I arrived a few minutes early for work on Monday, so I could get a brief description of the job and formally introduce myself to the small 6-man crew. I could tell right away that this was where I wanted to be, citing that every one of the crew members seemed to be laid back, easygoing, and most importantly, easy to work and get along with. This is exactly the way I would describe myself as being at the time. So I sensed right away that working with this group of guys was going to be a blast. The foreman of the crew was a local guy who went by the name Bo, which happened to be my uncle's name. I would describe Bo as being a cool, laid-back, middle-aged, good old country boy that would give anyone the shirt off his back if need be. All he asked from any of the crew was to simply do your job, and as long as you did, you wouldn't have to worry about anything or him giving you any crap. So that's exactly what myself and the rest of the crew did. After having worked there at Logan Aluminum / J&L Chemical for about a month, I started to take turns driving back and forth to work with the guy on our crew that happened to also live in the same town I did at the time, which is none other than good old Central City, Kentucky. Near the end of the month, Bo's car unfortunately had broken down on him, and I recalled him approaching myself and the guy that shared driving with me, whose name was Paul, to see if we wouldn't mind picking him up on our way to work, as well as dropping him off on our way home. Bo lived in a small town outside of Russellville, Kentucky, called Lewisburg. It was only a few miles away from where we worked, so picking Bo up and then taking him home in the evening wasn't a problem at all for myself or for Paul. As a matter of fact, we both looked forward to it, seeing that Bo was the jokester of the bunch, who kept everyone laughing and in a good mood no matter how bad he might have been feeling that day. Bo lived about 3 miles off the main highway that took us into Russellville, which was off of US Highway 431. It was a curvy ride through a heavily wooded area, and Bo's house was one of the few located in this densely populated area, making for a very creepy ride at 3:30 a.m. in the morning. But before I go any further, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Also, click on the bell icon so that you can stay in the loop and be notified each and every time I drop a brand new video. It was around the second week of either myself or Paul picking up our friend Bo, when Paul thought he spotted something through the bedroom curtains of Bo's home. He motioned for me to look up, but when I did, what Paul had thought he saw was gone. When I asked Paul about what he had seen, all he did was tell me that it wasn't nothing, and due to the fact that it was so early in the morning and he was barely awake, he must have been seeing things, so he just shook it off. So we waited a few minutes for Bo to finally come out of his house, and then we went on to work. But I'll never forget the seemingly distraught look that Paul had upon his face throughout the whole day at work. It was a look of both curiosity and fear, if you know what I mean. For the next few days, I could sense the fear coming from Paul each time we went to pick up Bo. It was a look of a person would get if they had nothing to do with what they really felt deep down inside and didn't want to do it. But nonetheless, Paul still refused to mention to me why this sudden feeling would come over him whenever we picked our friend up. But one could easily see that something was definitely troubling Paul. It was written all over Paul's face. Finally, around the third week of picking up our friend, and Paul acting the way he was, I had no other choice but to try to bait Paul into telling me what was going on with him as we traveled both to and from work. Hesitant at first, I was finally able to get Paul to at least talk about what was troubling him. As he turned and looked at me in the car while driving home, the look he gave me was one that I would never forget. With a pale face and a look of bone-curdling fear in his eyes, he began to ask me questions about Bo's house, such as if I had seen anything strange going on in his house whenever we waited for Bo outside in the car. I looked at him and said, "No. What are you talking about? Strange in what way?" He then looked over at me and said, "You know, like shadows of other people being in the house with Bo, especially that of what appeared to be a small child jumping around and playing." I calmly looked at my friend and told him no once again, and I'm glad that I hadn't. I could instantly tell that this wasn't the answer Paul wanted to hear. I could see it in his eyes, as well as hear it in the tone of his voice. Something had undoubtedly scared my friend in a very big way. For the next few days, I found myself locked in on Bo's house every time we went to pick him up, as well as keep an eye on very close eye on my friend Paul. But still nothing. I was beginning to feel as if my friend Paul was seeing things, or if perhaps he had a serious issue going on mentally, especially due to the fact that about 4 months prior to me getting the job in Melton Cast, Paul had sadly lost a child due to an unfortunate accident of riding his bicycle in Central City. So I was fully aware that there could possibly be some slight mental problems going on with my dear friend, such as grief, depression, as well as anxiety. Time would pass by, and still I hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary going on in Bo's home, but that would quickly come to a screeching end. It was on a Friday. It was payday. That's why I'm able to recall the day so well. It was also Paul's turn to drive. So as we proceeded to turn down the long, dark, creepy road leading up to Bo's house, I had my window rolled down and noticed immediately that although it was the middle of the summer, for some unknown reason it felt cooler outside than usual. At first it really didn't bother me, but the closer we got to Bo's house, the cooler it seemed to get. Although this was odd, I really didn't put any serious thought into it. When we pulled up to Bo's house, Paul honked his horn as usual to alert Bo that we were waiting outside. For some reason though, it took Bo a little longer than normal to come to the door this morning, demoting us that he would be out in a few minutes. When he finally did, bone-curdling chills went all over my body, For standing in the doorway beside Bo was a young girl dressed in a white gown, who appeared to be around 4 or 5 years old. It was the way she stood there, in this outdated gown, looking towards the car at myself and Paul, that gave us both goosebumps. Paul immediately motioned to me, asking me if I could see the little girl too. With my heart racing, I responded back to Paul, telling him, yes I do. At that moment, Bo waved at us and said he would be right out. A long while, the creepy little girl stared us down as the door slowly closed. Paul and I looked at one another in utter disbelief, asking the other, did you see her too? With both of us answering the same thing, which was yes. Seeing a little girl in a gown, for the most part, isn't a big deal. It was the outdated timeline of her dress and how she gave both of us the creeps when she looked right at us with a devilish grin as she stood in the doorway by our friend. When Bo finally made it to the car, Paul and I both couldn't wait to hear his explanation of who in fact the little girl was. But when we brought it up to Bo, attention, he chuckled and asked us what the heck were we talking about. Paul quickly responded to Bo, saying to him, and I know why it takes you so long to get ready. It's because you got a mama bear in the house with you. Because Wallace and I saw her, the little cub standing in the doorway beside you. The look on Bo's face was classic. It was the look of someone in complete shock for what was just told to them. He then quickly said that he hasn't had a woman in his life for a while, especially one with kids, so there was no way we saw anything or anybody in his doorway, nor in his house. It was at that moment that Paul would finally break down and tell Bo that he had been seeing a child for weeks, jumping around and playing through the curtains of his bedroom as well as living room whenever we came by to scoop him up. We thought that he was in a relationship with someone or just didn't bother mentioning it to us because it wasn't any of our business. But Bo will continue to plead this case with Paul and I. There was nobody in the house with him but himself, so the two of us had to be seeing things. We would continue to work at J&L Chemical for a few more months, with Bo never changing his story, and neither did we. Paul and I both saw the same little girl dressed in a white dress staring us down with her devilish eyes and skirmish look upon her face, leading both of us to come to the realization that what we saw was nothing other than what we would describe as being a ghost, due to the pale, almost transparent color of her skin and noticeably outdated clothing. Right before my final days of J&L, and right after Bo had gotten his car fixed, I recall Bo coming to me and Paul telling us about the unexpected change of events that had started taking place inside his home. He told us that at first, when he noticed objects showing up in places he knew they shouldn't be, he just brushed it off as him being tired of just imagining things. But when they started to escalate, he began to be more curious about the strange things happening within his home. He said he began to think that he would see shadows of what appeared to be small children out of the corners of his eyes, only to quickly turn around and nothing would be there, as well as hearing what sounded like laughter coming from his bedroom and living room areas, and finding no one there. Bo told us that the turning point of all the strange occurrences going on in his house came to a climax early one morning while he was laying in bed asleep. It was then that Bo told us that he got the scare of his life. While lying there in bed, Bo went on to tell Paul and I that a voice of a child whispered in his ear, telling him what he thought sounded like, "Help us, please." But Bo said he sprang up out of bed in complete fear and didn't go back to sleep the rest of the night, and that he moved from the house 2 weeks later, never once turning off any lights in his house the entire time. He also told Paul and I how he vowed to never again step foot back on their property. So, to anyone out there listening to this story, if you by chance happen to drive up or walk up to the home of a friend or anyone you know, and you see what looks like a child dressed in a white gown that looks completely out of place, make sure to take a very close look at what you think is an innocent little girl, because she just might be a ghost doing her best to scare the holy crap out of you. I'm Sir Crepsta, and until next time, stay terrified.